peace of mind in these troubled times. And today many people live in fear, and they have troubled hearts. Many people are plagued with panic, turmoil, and sleepless nights. And in this time in the world, war looms over the horizon. Our economy sucks. And many people are jobless, and many families are losing their homes. And God commanded us to be happy. So He commanded us to have peace. And you can't have peace without happiness. But in John 14 and 27, He said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." And in times like this, to tell us, let not your heart be troubled. But He also tells us how. That many of us are not able to find peace. For many of us, peace comes and goes, leaving us worried, restless, battered by stress. How can we stay in peace when all seems out of control? We go to the rock of our salvation. I want to read this to you, and it's take note. It's great. It says in 1 Samuel 2, 1 through 10, "And Hannah prayed and said, My heart rejoiceth in the Lord, and my horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in my salvation." In thy, it didn't say my, I'm sorry, forgive me. It said in thy salvation. And there is none holy as the Lord, there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. It's talk no more, so exceedingly proud. Let not arrogancy come out of your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by Him actions are weighed. He knows our thoughts before we think them, and then our actions, He weighs them. And the bows of the mighty men, the bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. He said, my power is, strength is in weakness. His greatest, I forget how that goes, but anyway, He's, He said, when I'm weak, it's when I'm the strongest. That's what. And it said, they that were full have hired out themselves for bread, and they that were hungry ceased, so that the barren hath borne 7, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. The Lord killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave, and He bringeth up. The Lord maketh poor, and He maketh rich. He bringeth low, and He lifts up. He raised up the poor out of the dust, and lifted up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princesses, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and He has set the world upon them. He will keep the feet of His saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Out of heaven shall He thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and He shall give strength unto the king, and exalt the horn of His anointed. It's the Lord of peace. Christ provides peace for us in our worst circumstances. It's not what happens, it's how we handle it. It's whether we cast our cares upon the Lord, and little things we think don't mean too much, but He does. Little things mean a lot. And 2 Thessalonians 3:16. Now the Lord of peace Himself give you peace always by all means. The Lord be with you all. Rejoice and make your requests be made known to God. And Philippians 4:4-9, it said, rejoice in the Lord, and again I say, rejoice. Let your moderation be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any praise, think on all these things. And when you're thinking all of these things, you ain't got time to be worried. You're at peace. You know, they give you soft music to go to sleep by. Well, you can be at peace with this. And in 2 Peter, it says, be diligent, that ye may be found of Him in peace, without spot or blameless. That's in 2 Peter 3:10-14. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also, and the works that are therein, will be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of person ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. And said, nevertheless, we, according to His promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. Wherefore, beloved, seeing that ye look for such things, be diligent that ye be found of Him in peace, without spot or wrinkle. By taking everything to God in prayer, all our anxieties and requests, we obtain His peace, not our peace. He gives us peace. And John 16:33, He said, these things have I spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. And in the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. Said, I've overcome the world. And in Romans 8:6, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is peace. In Colossians 3:15, which says, let the peace of God rule in your hearts. And brethren, if we let His peace rule in our hearts, we have perfect peace. That's Isaiah 26:3. It says, in closing, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. And without the Prince of Peace in our lives, we are like an unsharpened pencil. There is no point to our lives.
Okay. Daniel chapter 13. I'm just kidding. I want to see how many people we're going to turn there. There is no Daniel 13.
No, it's only 12 chapters.
I gotcha.
You're kidding.
Oh, well.
wow. That's a good one. Yeah, you'll find how many people are awake.
Okay, well, now that we've finished the book of Daniel, I want to go back and review the main prophecies. If you ever begin to doubt, if you ever begin to question or wonder what is true, just replay this video and remind yourself God is in control. It is His plan. He will bring it to pass right on time. Guaranteed. God reveals the prophecies to Daniel in different ways. Dreams, visions, answers to prayer by both, and visits from angels with messages from God. So I'm going to begin in Daniel chapter 2 and just review some of these main prophecies that just prove that God is true. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 31 has to do with the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he wanted the wise men to tell him the dream and the interpretation, and of course nobody could, and so he's going to kill them all. And Daniel and his three friends prayed, and God gave him the answer. In verse 31, "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold." So Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, by extent, was the head of gold. Chapter 4 and verse 28 says, "All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months he was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. The king spoke, saying, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" So we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar, and Babylon is the head of gold. And chapter 2 and verse 39 then it says, "But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." So if we go to chapter 5 then, in verse 1, it says, "Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. And in verse 30, "That very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old." So the Medo-Persian Empire received or took the kingdom of Babylon. So, as we go through these, it's just a historical fact. You can check with any encyclopedia, historical book, even archaeology the monuments, they all prove these things. It's not something that's questionable. Everyone knows these things. It's just a fact of history. One other point, though, I'd like to bring out here is what I mentioned when we went through chapter 5, and that is in verse 8. It says, "Now all the king's wise men came, and they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation," the handwriting on the wall. And in verse 24, it says, "Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written." So they couldn't read or understand the writing that was on the wall because God wrote it. The Bible is the same. God wrote it. He inspired the people that wrote it. No one can understand the Bible unless God gives them the understanding and the ability to understand it, to read it, and to know what it means to the degree that He wants you to understand it. You have scholars that read it and they say it means this and it means that. And you have scholars that read it and say, no, it don't mean that, it means this and it means that. Well, we are the same way. We know, understand that it means one thing, and the churches of the world say, no, it doesn't mean that. I was watching just as an example, I was watching an old episode of Murder, She Wrote. And she was in Amish country, and the car ran off the road. And so they were trying to get someone to tow the car and to get the car fixed. And she went into this village, and she went into the church. And she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt services." They said, she told the situation. They said, "Work is verboten on the Sabbath." She said, "Well, certainly there must be somebody in town that can." No. All the stores and shops were closed on Sunday. What day of the week is the 7th, and which day of the week is the 1st? It's not that hard to figure out. So, right there is the difference between what we believe and what others believe. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 1. Back to Babylon. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, "I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it." The lion is Babylon. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, "Arise, devour much flesh." The bear is Medo-Persia. Chapter 8 and verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the first one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there anyone that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. As I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram, and he was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him. And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. What is all this? It's simple. We turn to verse 15. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, Understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me upright. And he said, Look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time the end shall be. The ram which you saw having the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So there's no reason for us to guess or to speculate. The angel Gabriel just told Daniel what it was, and he wrote it down. It's the kings of Medo-Persia. And it is confirmed by history. So now we go back to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, once again in verse 39, the second half of that. He says, And then a 3rd kingdom of bronze which shall rule over all the earth. The 3rd kingdom is Greece. Chapter 7 and verse 6. He says, After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on his back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So it's a leopard with 4 wings, 4 heads. Is that a strange looking leopard? So you wonder, okay, what is this? God tells us, chapter 8 and verse 8. He says, Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when it became strong, the large horn was broken, and in its place 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great, toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. What was it? Verse 21. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not in its power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not of his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive, and shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Greece is the 3rd kingdom, divided into 4 after the death of Alexander, gradually became 2, which was the king of the north and the king of the south, and the little horn was Antiochus Epiphanes. As you go through history books and even 1st and 2nd Maccabees, that all is played out just as God prophesied it would be, and all confirmed by history. Again, the angel speaks to Daniel and chapter 11 and verse 1. It says, also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. So at this time, Daniel's already in the Medo-Persian Empire, because it was taken over by Darius the Mede when Belshazzar had the feast. So Daniel went in from Babylon, went into the Medo-Persia, and the angel's telling him now, well, there's going to be 3 more kings yet that are going to rise up in Persia before Greece comes up and takes over. And then when Alexander the great king, takes over, he's going to be put down. The kingdom's going to be broken up into 4, but it's not going to be his posterity. It's not going to be his kids that take the kingdom. It's going to be the 4 generals. And so all this is laid out by God, explaining all this stuff to Daniel through the angel, and he's writing all this stuff down so we can know all these things. So, back to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. I might mention that back in chapter 11, then I didn't go through the rest of it, of course, because from verse 5 to verse 20 is just the various kings of the north, kings of the south, and the wars that they had. I went over all that. And verse 21 on then, of course, is Antiochus Epiphanes, who then blends into the end time beast, the king of the north. So, Daniel chapter 2 and verse 40. And the 4th kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. The 4th kingdom then, what does history tell us? Was Rome. Chapter 7 and verse 7 says, and after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. So there again is the iron. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So here's a beast with 10 horns. Verse 17, the interpretation. Those great beasts, which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. 4 kings representing, of course, their kingdoms. Verse 23, thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. So again, history tells us it was Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greco-Macedonian Empire, followed by the Roman Empire. Now, history tells us that, so we know that. And God revealed this to Daniel and had him write it down. History agrees with the Bible and with the prophecies of the book of Daniel. If the visions, the dreams, and messages from angels given to Daniel hundreds of years before they happened have all come to pass, just as written, over the course of those hundreds of years, then why would there be any doubt that the rest of the prophecies given for the end time would not come to pass exactly as they are written. God reveals these things, wrote them down hundreds of years before they happened. So we could sit there, the people who lived through it and the people of today could look back and see, look, all these things happen, just as God said they would happen. He told you, Babylon is the head of gold. After him, it's going to be Medo-Persian Empire. He did it by a statue. He did it by visions of a beast. He did it by visions of a goat and a ram. And he did it by an angel explaining what all of it was. Daniel chapter 2, once again. Verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. The Roman Empire was divided in 395 AD, 800 years after this prophecy was written. It was broken, but it was still strong. 800 years before it happened, he told them it was going to happen. We have all these things written down, point by point by point, to let us know. So we can go back and we can look at it, and we can prove it. I was asked once by a teenager after a funeral out in the parking lot. He came up to me and he wanted to know, he says, how do I know what's true? How do I know what you're saying is right, or whether a Muslim is right, or whether a Buddhist is right? How do I know? I said, it's real simple. No other religion, and nobody else's God, has foretold the future and had it come to pass. I said, just get yourself a history book and the book of Daniel and read it. You're not going to find that in a Muslim book. You're not going to find it in a Buddhist book or anybody else's book. It's real simple to prove which one is right. You just got to get a book and read it and prove it. It's right there. Verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. So now we are down to the toes, okay, the end of the image, the end time. We started with the head, the top, the beginning, with Nebuchadnezzar as the head of gold, and we end down with the toes, as the old saying, from head to toe. We went from the head down to the toes. We're at the end. And that's where the toes are at, the end. So when we read about the toes, we're reading about the end time. And the end time, the toes are connected to the feet and the leg. No. The toes are connected to the feet, and the feet are connected to the legs, and the legs were the iron, and the legs of iron were the Roman Empire, and it went down and was divided. It was still the Roman Empire. It was weak, but it was divided, but it was still partly strong. So, verse 43. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So the toes, the kingdom, Rome, at the end, will be a mixed multitude, mingled together, but not really united. And it's the same thing that we have today. When we look at Europe, what it is, it's a group of nations. They're all different. They're not really united. And when the final formation comes, it'll be the same way. Verse 44, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. In the days of these kings. What kings? I thought we were talking about toes. Well, just like in a lot of dreams that you have, things change. Characters change, situations change. You're doing this, and in the next split second, you're doing something completely different in your dream, and you don't even know how did you get from here to there, and what does all that mean? It's just total confusion sometimes in a dream. It makes no sense. Well, that's the way this is. All of a sudden, God's telling him, the toes are kings. The 10 toes are 10 kings. We are told in their day, God will set up his kingdom. In the days of these kings. Well, assuming there was 10 toes, there would be 10 kings. So if we go just real quick to Revelation 17, of course, that will tell us something about the end time. Revelation 17 and verse 12. Well, back to verse 11, it says, the beast that was and is not is himself also the eighth, and is of the seven, and going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. The same end time, the same kingdom, the same 10 kings, overcome by Christ as he returns to set up his kingdom. The toes are at the end time. How many toes are there? 10. And he says, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. And Revelation, when God confirmed that by an angel to the Apostle John and had him write it down, that's what he wrote. These 10 horns are 10 kings which are going to fight Christ. When's that? At the end time, when he returns. So we're talking about the same thing. Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 will also confirm this. Daniel 7 and verse 23. Again, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. What's one of the ways that it was different? It divided, it disappeared, it came back, it disappeared, it came back, and it's going to come back again. The 10 horns are 10 kings. Didn't we just read that in Revelation? Revelation and Daniel confirm each other. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom. Which kingdom? The fourth kingdom, which was what? Rome. The old Roman Empire. And another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. And what do? What do we read? They're going to give their strength and power and authority to the beast. They're going to support the beast, join in with them. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall be seated, that shall take away his dominion to consume it and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So once again, out of the fourth kingdom, at the end, 10 kings shall arise. And we believe this kingdom is to be a revived Roman Empire in Europe. How could we think of anything else? If these 10 kings come from that kingdom, which is the fourth kingdom. But we understand from the statute that it's also the toes and it's at the end time. So that's the only way we can understand it. The fourth kingdom was Rome. And if it's going to be at the time when the saints are going to be persecuted and the saints are going to inherit the kingdom, what other time could that be except the end time when Christ returns? So that's where we're at. Now, Daniel chapter 9. And in verse 21. Of course, this is a prayer that Daniel was given, and once again, Gabriel is sent to Daniel. Yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come to give you skill to understand. At the beginning of your supplication, the command went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore consider the matter and understand the vision. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. In other words, 70 weeks are determined between now and the kingdom of God. That's what he's telling them. Because that's when all these things are going to happen, when the kingdom of God finally arrives. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. This was a message from God delivered by the angel Gabriel. Instant communication while he was still praying. Didn't even get up from his knees yet, and the angel was there with the answer to his prayer. He tells him exactly what is to happen and when. 70 weeks, 490 years. From the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah would be cut off would be 7 weeks plus the 62 weeks, or 49 years plus the 434 years, for a total of 483 years. The command given in 454 BC, 483 years later, Christ would die. Verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's the 62 weeks plus the 7 weeks that were first. So it's the 69 weeks. After those 69 weeks, Messiah was going to be cut off, going to be killed. Now Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 1 tells us that the command was given in the month of Nisan, or Abib. But as is recorded, once they went into captivity, they used the Aramaic terms, and it's the month of Nisan. So God is telling us, and we can depend on and trust in His Word. He is showing how exact He can be over 400 years before the event. He is telling us what year, what day, and what hour Messiah would die. After the 69 weeks, after the 483 years. If the year began with the first month, the month of Nisan, it would end at the end of the last month. So after 483 years was over, then the 484th year began. As it began, time was up. Messiah was going to be cut off. When? On the 14th day of the first month. On the Passover. Because he is our Passover. The holy days foreshadowed all of this. When we go back to Exodus and we read all about the Passover and what all was done in the Passover lamb, we understand all that represented Christ. So he was to die on the 14th day of the first month after the 483 years at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour. When he cried out, "It is finished. Into thy hands I commit my spirit." And he died. God tells us there is 1 week left. 7 years. He tells us what to expect when that time begins. What he didn't tell us was that after the 69 weeks and Messiah was cut off, there was going to be a big gap before that last week started. Because what was supposed to happen at the end of that last week, at the end of that last 7 years, what was going to happen? Christ was going to return. He didn't. That last week didn't happen yet. It's still in the future. So in verse 27 it tells us the person who is, after Messiah is cut off, the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and at the end of the war the desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolator. So, the covenant, or treaty, or agreement is signed for 7 years, and in the middle of that time is the sacrifices are cut off, they cease. Daniel 11 and verse 40 says, "At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through." Chapter 12 and verse 1, "At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book." And verse 11, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days." And Matthew 24. Matthew 24 and verse 15. "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand." Verse 21, "Then shall be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be." Same time, the great tribulation. Verse 29, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heavens, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. God gives us definite things to watch for, to see, to understand, and to count. To know he is in control, it is his plan, and it is right on time. So, in summary, in other words, I said all that to say this. God has given to us the book of Daniel. It contains dreams and visions from God and messages delivered by angels, including the angel Gabriel sent to Daniel with an answer to prayer, to show to those who will read it what God has done and will do. That he has a schedule, a plan, a timetable to give us hope and encouragement, and to prove to us that he is in charge, he is in control. He has provided a huge 2,000-year gap in that 70 weeks. The priests, the scholars, the leaders of God's people should have known by the prophecies of Daniel the 483 years were up. Sometime in the next few days, Messiah would be killed. Look around. Who could it be? That's the question they should have been asking. They should have known these things. They should have been saying, Messiah is supposed to be here. The time is up. He's supposed to die. Who could it be? As they looked around, who else could it have been? Who else was doing the miracles? Who else was stirring up all the controversy? Who was putting the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees to shame? Did they know? Or were they so full of jealousy, envy, hatred, and murder they couldn't see him, even though they had their hands on him? We will know when it begins, because God has told us. We will see a king of the south forcing an altercation with the king of the north. We're waiting right now for this to happen. And what's in the news again? After a year, Egypt is in turmoil all over again. Why? Because God says, that's not how it's going to happen. We're going to make some changes. He steps back and he allows more humanity to take over and make a mess of things until they get it the way he says, okay, we can do it this way. And that's where we're at. We're waiting to see, okay, who's going to be in charge now? Who's the next guy going to come up? Is he going to be able to accomplish anything? Or are we going to still be waiting for something to happen? We will see. See what happens. We've been waiting and nothing has happened. It could be the next guy that takes over, it'll just speed up into high gear and just zoom, and we'll be there. And it'll happen. And somebody like, who knows? Iran or somebody that's going to back them as part of the coalition and say, we're going to force their hand. we're going to cut off the oil. And Europe says, you think so? Whatever's going to be, it is in the works. So we're going to see a king of the south force an altercation with the king of the north. That king of the north will be the leader of a group of nations formed out of the iron legs and feet, the toes, which are 10 kings or leaders of those nations. The king of the south will most likely also be the leader of a group of nations. We will see that king of the north respond with overwhelming force. Simultaneously, he will sign a treaty or agreement with Israel as Christ opens that first seal. And the king of the north, the beast, goes forth conquering and to conquer. Right now, that's what we're waiting for. We know what's going to happen because John was allowed to see what was going to happen as he opened the seals. But the seals aren't open yet because none of that has started. The scroll is still sealed. And the Father has got it in his hand. Christ told us that he's placed it in his own authority. No one knows the day or the hour or the year. It's in his power because the scroll's still in his hand. And Christ is sitting there on the right hand of the Father, and eventually he's going to go, and Christ is going to take the scroll and stand up. This is it. This is what we've been waiting for. The 24 elders are going to jump up and they're going to bow down and they're going to start praising hallelujah, and it's going to begin as he opens the first seal, and that last week begins. Some sort of structure is built, consecrated, and sacrifices begin. 2 witnesses will issue Earth's final warning. This is it. Believe the truth or else. They rejected. Somewhere in the midst of that week, about 3.5 years or so later, the sacrifices cease. The abomination of desolation is revealed, and God tells us we have 1,290 days. How accurate we'll be able to tell time at that point in time? Are we going to lose track of time? If you're locked up in prison, if you don't have a rock to scratch on the wall or something, you don't know what day it is. So there's going to be a point in time, even though God's telling us it's going to be so many days, are we going to be able to keep track of time? How are we going to know if we don't have a watch and the sun isn't shining what time it is? Is it noon or midnight? So even though he tells us there are certain events, we'll know what to look for as the events unfold. We will be hated and persecuted, but God tells us to hold on, and we will see the heavenly signs. To look up, to lift up our heads, because our redemption draws nigh. The 7 trumpets begin to sound, and with each passing blast, we realize that we are about to be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trump. We shall become spirit beings born into the family of God, rising to meet Christ in the air, preparing to receive the kingdom and reign with Christ. God wants us to know this. He wrote it down, preserved it for us, backed it up by proving it through history and all the history books that are out there. He wants us to know this, to understand it. He wrote it down for us. It is God's sure word of prophecy.